Melkor is one of the Valar, and was one of the Aratar, though he is no longer considered to be in that great order. He was the most powerful of the race of the Valar, for he shared in the power and knowledge of all his kind. In the beginning, Melkor was made by Eru, and he, like his fellow Ainu, took part in the Ainu Lindale, which was the music of the Ainu, that led to the creation of the universe. However, Melkor disrupted the great music, for he wished to alter the music of his fellow Valar so that it was alike to his own, and because of Melkor's disruption, much harm was done in the creation of Arda. When most of the Valar entered Air in order to prepare it for the awakening of the children of Eru, Melkor instead descended upon Arda to claim it as his own kingdom, and for this, he was challenged by Manwë and all the other Valar. This conflict was later called the First War, and in it, Melkor disrupted the work of the Valar, and in some instances, he altered their work completely. With the intervention of the Valar Tulkars, Manwë and his forces won this war, and the Valar would then make Arda habitable for the children of Eru, but Melkor would depart from Arda for some time. The Valar would later make the two lamps, for Arda needed light, and these were Iluin, which stood in the north of Arda, and Ormul, which stood in the south of Arda. The light of these two lamps converged on the island of Almaren, and this was the first dwelling of the Valar on Arda. Upon seeing the great work of his fellow Valar, Melkor grew envious of it and devised a plan to destroy the Valar's home of Almaren. He descended in secret to Arda and made his first great fortress, Otumno, in the north of Arda. Using Otumno as a base, Melkor with his servants the Umayyah, who were Maiar that he had corrupted to his will during the Great Music, and other Maiar that were living in Almaren but were secretly Melkor's servants, they all together attacked the two lamps of Ada, destroyed them, and their light was spilled into the sea. The resulting catastrophe led to the destruction of the island of Almaren, and the Valar left Middle-earth and set up their new home of Valinor in Aman, and the original shape of Arda was also destroyed. Melkor would then have rule over all Middle-earth, and he created foul evil creatures in Otumno. But he was not completely unchallenged, for Orome, who is the huntsman of the Valar, would often ride to Middle-earth out of Aman to hunt down Melkor's evil creatures, and Yavanna Kementari, the Queen of the Earth, would too urge the rest of her fellow Valar to wage war upon Melkor so that her creations would be free from his corruption, and the children of Eru, who were yet to awake, would not have to suffer under his rule. When the firstborn of Eru, the Elves, awoke, Melkor was the first of the Valar to discover this, and he sent evil spirits amongst them to try to turn them against the Valar. Some were convinced, and these would later refuse the summons of the Valar given to the Elves to journey to Aman. Some of these Elves, called the Avari, Melkor would later capture, torture, and corrupt into the hideous race of the Orcs. This act was the greatest affront towards Eru that Melkor ever did. But the Valar did not leave the Elves to the evil of Melkor, for they attacked Melkor in what would later be known as the Battle of the Powers, defeated him and his forces, destroyed Otumno, and Melkor himself was chained up and taken to Valinor. There, Melkor was sentenced to a 3,000-year imprisonment in the halls of Mandos, where none can escape. Melkor would never forget that the Valar had waged war upon him for the sake of the Elves, and for this, he hated the Elves bitterly. When the term of his imprisonment ended, Melkor begged the Valar for pardon, and though some were untrusting of his supposed change, Manwë pardoned Melkor, but he was forbidden to leave Aman. This, however, worked in Melkor's favor, for it gave him a chance to exact his revenge upon the Valar and the Elves. Melkor would accomplish this by seeking out the Elves, and in particular the Noldor, for the Vanyar rejected him, and he saw little value in the Teleri of Aquilond. The Noldor's curious nature worked in Melkor's favor, for he told them of the wonders and vastness of Middle-earth, and he lied to the Noldor that they would have been free to make out their own kingdoms in Middle-earth had they not been kept in Aman by the Valar. These lies made many of the Noldor to resent the Valar, and this is what Melkor desired. Melkor's lies worked best in the house of Finwë, where he turned Fëanor against his brothers, Fingolfin and Finarfin. Melkor did this for he wanted to isolate Fëanor in order to take the Silmarils from him. And this plan nearly worked, for following Fëanor's banishment from Tirion for breaking the peace of Valinor, Melkor approached him in Formenus, and he tried to convince Fëanor to leave Aman, lying to him that his Silmarils would not be safe from the Valar if he stayed. This, however, only angered the proud Fëanor, for he then realized that Melkor desired to obtain his great jewels. The mightiest of the Valar was then rebuked, and commanded to leave Formenus by Fëanor. Fëanor's father, King Finwë, who had accompanied his beloved son in his banishment to Formenos, would then send messages to the Valar to inform them that Melkor had been to Formenos. Melkor escaped Formenos before Tulkas and Orome could find him, but instead of returning to Middle-earth, Melkor went to Avathar, which was a dark wasteland that laid south on the great continent of Aman, for this was the home of the monstrous Ungoliant, who Melkor wished to seek out. The true origin of Ungoliant is unknown, though it's speculated that she might have been one of the greatest of the Maiar, but like Sauron, was corrupted by Melkor during the great music of the Ainu. However, it's also believed that she might have been one of the Valar. Ungoliant had first allied with the Dark Lord during his reign in Utumno, but following his defeat at the hands of the Powers, she fled to the southern region of Aman, where she took on the form of a giant monstrous spider that consumed all the life and light around it, and it was in that hideous, monstrous form that the Dark Lord Melkor found her. He tried to persuade her to join him on his quest of vengeance against the Valar by promising her a feast that would satisfy her great hunger. Despite her greed, Ungoliant feared to attack the great lords of Valinor, and it was only with the promise that he would give her all the riches that they might attain in Valinor that Melkor managed to gain her allegiance. Together, they attacked the two trees of Valinor, whereupon Melkor wounded them, and Ungoliant drained them of their sap, which led to their deaths, and darkening Valinor in the process. After this heinous act, they then travelled to Formenos, where Melkor would kill King Finwë and steal the Silmarils. Upon hearing of the murder of his beloved father, Fëanor would curse Melkor, naming him Morgoth, and it's by this name that the children of Eru and the Valar would name him thereafter. However, Morgoth and Ungoliant were not captured by the Valar, despite Orome and Tulkas hunting for them. The alliance of Morgoth and Ungoliant did not last long, for when they reached Middle-earth, Morgoth tried to outpace Ungoliant so as to arrive to Angband. Angband was the second fortress the Dark Lord Morgoth had raised after his triumphant victory over the Valar, when he destroyed the two lamps of Ada. He had put Sauron in command of the fortress, but it too was besieged during the Battle of the Powers, when the Valar waged war upon Melkor. Unfortunately, Angband was not wholly destroyed by the Valar during this battle, and many of Morgoth's servants had escaped in its underground tunnels, and they would stay there for millennia, waiting for his return. It's therefore in Angband that Morgoth thought that he would be safe from Ungoliant, who after drinking up the sap of the two trees of Valinor, had grown to such a great grotesque size, that even the Dark Lord feared her. However, Ungoliant sensed that Morgoth wished to escape her, and so she waylaid him, demanding that he fulfill the promise that he had given her in Avathar. Morgoth did give her some of the jewels that he had stolen from Formenos, but he refused to give up the Silmarils, which caused Ungoliant to ferociously attack him, for she greedily desired them. Ungoliant's attack caused the Dark Lord such pain that he let out a great cry that awoke his Umayyah, or Balrogs, and they came to save their master, and it was only with their intervention that Morgoth was saved from Ungoliant's wrath. The place that Ungoliant attacked Morgoth would thereafter be called Lammoth, for if anyone shouted in this place thereafter, they would instead hear the echo of Morgoth's terrible cry of pain. Together with his servants, Morgoth returned to Angband, where he would fortify it and prepare for war. But Ungoliant fled the Balrogs to Erd Gorgoroth, or the Mountains of Terror, where she would go on to breed with the great spiders that dwelt there, and her children would terrorize the people of this region for generations. Following the exile and banishment of the Noldor from Aman, the Noldor and the other peoples of Beleriand waged the wars of Beleriand against the Dark Lord, Morgoth. The Noldor in particular would have great, but sometimes bitter victories over Morgoth and his evil forces, and these included the Dagger New in Gileath, or the Battle Under the Stars, which though was a victory for the Noldor, their king Fëanor was mortally wounded in this battle and later died. The Battle of Lammoth too was a great victory for the Noldor, but Argon, the son of Fingolfin, was killed in it. The greatest victory of the Noldor against Morgoth was the Dagger Aglareb, or the Glorious Battle, and in this Morgoth's forces were utterly destroyed by King Fingolfin's armies. The result of this battle was the besiegement of Angband, and the long peace of Beleriand that lasted 400 years. Morgoth would however break this long siege in the Dagger Brigolach, or the Battle of Sudden Flame, and in this the Dark Lord deployed rivers of magma that flowed out the Thangorodrim, and he unleashed Glorung, who was the father of the dragons. Balrogs and legions of orcs were also unleashed, and these forces together devastated the peoples and the lands of Beleriand, and thereafter war would never wholly leave Beleriand. Filled with anger and despair over the defeat of his people, the High King of the Noldor in Middle-earth, Fingolfin, resolved to challenge the Dark Lord Morgoth in single combat. In what would turn out to be one of the greatest acts of the Noldor in Middle-earth, Fingolfin on his steed Rochula rode across the scorched plains of Anforglith, and upon reaching Angband, Fingolfin mockingly challenged Morgoth to fight him in single combat. Though still the mightiest of the Valar in Ada, the Dark Lord Morgoth was fearful to face Fingolfin, but he could not refuse to face the Noldorin king without losing respect among his servants. So with his great hammer, Grond, the Dark Lord met the High King of the Noldor, and the duel of the Valar, Morgoth, and the elf, Fingolfin, began. Though King Fingolfin fought valiantly, even injuring Morgoth several times, the Dark Lord was eventually victorious, as he killed Fingolfin in this duel, but before he could feed the dead king's body to his wolves, Thorondor, the king of the eagles, attacked Morgoth and retrieved King Fingolfin's body. And though he was victorious, the Dark Lord Morgoth would thereafter walk with a limp, due to the wounds Fingolfin gave him. Following the dagger Brigolach, one of the 3 Silmarils in Morgoth's possession was taken from him by Beren and Luthien. Beren was the son of Barahir and Emeldir, and following the destruction of his home of Dorthonion, in the Battle of Sudden Flame, he wandered into the guarded realm of Doriath, where he fell in love with Luthien. Luthien was the daughter of the elven king, Eru Thingol, and the Maya, Melian, and she was considered the most beautiful of all the children of Eru to ever exist. Luthien too fell in love with Beren, but her father, Eru Thingol, deemed Beren unworthy of his daughter when Beren asked for Luthien's hand in marriage. As a marriage price, Thingol demanded that Beren deliver to him one of the Silmarils in Morgoth's possession. This task seemed impossible, but Beren bravely accepted to retrieve the Silmaril from Morgoth. Though King Thingol tried to prevent her from joining Beren, Luthien, with the help of Hu on the Hound, would later join Beren, and the 3 of them would accomplish this great task of retrieving a Silmaril from Morgoth. Though the Dark Lord was at first wrathful for the loss of this Silmaril, Beren's Silmaril would later awaken the Orth of Fina, which would greatly work in Morgoth's favor. The peoples of Beleriand would once again test the Dark Lord Morgoth under the union of Maethros. They met Morgoth's hosts on the blackened fields of Anforglith and the Fen of Serek. In what would come to be called the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, or the Nerneath Arnediad, the forces of Morgoth won the battle due to the Dark Lord's cruelty and trickery. However, Morgoth's victory was not entirely complete, for the hidden kingdom of Gondolin was still standing after the Nerneath Arnediad, and it was from Gondolin that the last hope for elves and men would come. Gondolin had been set up by Tugon, who was the son of Fingolfin, and after the Nerneath Arnediad, he had become the High King of the Noldor in Beleriand. He was however warned through the messengers of Ulmo the Valar that the hope of the Noldor laid in a man, and that Tugon would have to abandon his city and sail west. Tugon however refused to follow this advice, choosing instead to stay in Gondolin. In time, his daughter Idril married the man, Tuor, and they had a son named Irandil. But the curse of Mandos upon the Noldor could not be forestalled, for by foul treachery, the Dark Lord Morgoth would later discover the hidden realm of Gondolin, and later with the aid of Maeglin, who was Tugon's nephew, Morgoth's forces attacked and destroyed the city of Gondolin, and King Tugon was killed. Irandil and the surviving Noldor of Gondolin escaped to Arvernian, which was a coastal region of Beleriand. With the help of Círdan the shipwright, Irandil would later make his ship Vingelet, and would sail west to seek after his father and mother, and also to hopefully find a man where he could beseech the Valar to come to the aid of the elves and men in their war against the Dark Lord, Morgoth. However, the sons of Fina attacked Arvernian after Irandil's departure, for one of their father's Silmarils was in the possession of Elwing, the wife of Irandil. Still bound to the oath they had made in Tirion, the sons of Fina killed almost all the people they found in Arvernian in their pursuit of the Silmaril. However, they failed to attain it, for the holder of the Silmaril, Elwing, threw herself in the sea rather than give it up. Elwing and the Silmaril were not lost after this fall, for the Lord of the Sea Ulmo bore them from the great sea of Belegare. Ulmo would give Elwing the likeness of a great beautiful white bird, and it's in this form that she found her husband, Irandil. Irandil and Elwing would then sail and reach to the shores of Aman, from which Irandil went to Valinor, and beseeched the Valar to aid the elves and men in their war against Morgoth. The Valar accepted Irandil's plea for help, and they raised a mighty host to attack Morgoth. This host consisted of the Valar, the Vanyar, the Noldor that had stayed in Aman, and some Maya. The hosts of the Valar met Morgoth's armies in the north of Beleriand, and in what would later be called the War of Wrath, the Dark Lord's hosts were destroyed, but in a last desperate act, Morgoth unleashed the winged dragons upon the hosts of the Valar. The greatest among these winged dragons was Ancalagan the Black. But all of this was for naught, for the eagles of Manwë, and Irandil upon his ship Vingelet, came to aid the hosts of the Valar. The dragons were destroyed, and Ancalagan was killed by Irandil himself. Fearing to face the victorious hosts of the Valar, the cowardly Morgoth hid in the deepest of his dungeons in Angband, where he was eventually captured, bound like a thief, and the 2 Silmarils that he still had in his possession were taken from him. However, the 2 surviving sons of Fina, Maethros and Maglo, who felt that they were still bound to their terrible oath, attacked the encampment of the host of the Valar and took the 2 Silmarils. However, they had become unworthy of these holy jewels due to their many evil acts, and because of this, both Maethros and Maglo felt great pain due to their possession of the Silmarils. To relieve themselves of this pain, Maethros cast himself and his Silmaril into a fiery ravine that had been formed due to the destruction of Beleriand, and Maglo threw his Silmaril into the sea. After his downfall, the Dark Lord Morgoth would later be cast by the Valar into the timeless void, where he still remains, until the Dagger Daggerath. But Beleriand had been destroyed in the War of Wrath, and the elves that once called it their home were urged to journey to the undying lands of Aman. Though some agreed to do this, many, like the Lady Galadriel, refused to comply, and they instead opted to form new realms in Eriador. As for the descendants of the 3 houses of men that had dwelled in the destroyed Beleriand, they were awarded with the island of Numenor by the Valar for their bravery during the War of Wrath. The peoples of Middle-earth and the men of Numenor would then live in relative peace until the former chief lieutenant of Morgoth, Sauron, rose up to become the new Dark Lord of Middle-earth.